Hey guys, Booligan here with Booligan Shooting Sports. And today we're looking at arguably one of the worst AR pistols that has ever really come into existence. But it's also one of the earliest AR pistols and is designed around the laws of the time. So obviously it's not going to be ideal compared to what we think of as a good AR pistol today. This is the Bushmaster Carbon 15. This is a later version of the Bushmaster Carbon 15. They were originally designed by Professional Ordnance, and then eventually Bushmaster took over the operation. The whole Carbon 15 concept was put together during the assault weapons ban of 1994. One of the triggering events of that, or one of the triggering specifications of the assault weapons ban, was weight. If you're, especially for pistols, if it weighed over a certain amount, then it was considered an assault weapon and you couldn't have it. So different companies at the time approached this in different ways. Olympic Arms made a series of really kind of ridiculous skeletonized aluminum frame and aluminum receivered upper and lower, but skeletonized versions in order to shave weight. And of course, you've got some great videos on that by Forgotten Weapons. They, in Professional Ordnance's case, and then later on Bushmaster, they said, okay, well, what if we just make the whole thing out of polymers? The whole thing, the lower, the upper, the buffer tube. Why do we even need to have a rail or a handguard on it? We don't need any of that stuff. In order to make this weight, let's make the whole thing out of plastic. Let's call it the Carbon 15 and let's sell it. With the name like the Carbon 15, a lot of people assume the lower is made of high-tech carbon fiber. It's not. It's like a carbon-infused polymer, but it's still basically just plastic. There's nothing too Gucci or high-tech about the polymers being used in this. What they did equip them with, now again, this is a later version because this is the version that actually has the handguard and the top rail. This is, I believe, the 97S model. There's no additional stampings or anything like that to indicate what it is. But yeah, this is the later version. But the original versions of these had none of that stuff. It was literally just a barrel and a gas system sticking out the front. The barrel is a stainless steel, or at least was. I believe it actually still is on this one from what I'm seeing, but it's a stainless steel fluted barrel, so it actually has lightning flutes in it. It's actually a decent little barrel. Probably would have some good accuracy in ballistics if it wasn't 7.5 inches long. Very, very short. This is even shorter than my LaFrance M16K build. It's a tiny little thing. Now, one of the things that you couldn't have at the time, you couldn't have a flash hider. You couldn't have the barrel threaded for things. And you notice this has a muzzle device on it. Well, it's because this is a compensator. This isn't a flash hider. It's designed to, expel gases there and there. It does not minimize flash, especially not out of a 7.5-inch barrel. Not many things outside of a Miracle can diminish the flash of a 5.56 out of a 7.5-inch barrel. But how is it attached? It came threads. Well, it uses kind of a novel system of detents and a barrel with little receptive spots for those detents. So when someone asks, what muzzle threads does this have? Well, none. It's got some ball bearings. Very, very, very strange setup there. And this gun is greasy as hell, so I will be dirty the rest of this video. As I mentioned before, this guy is completely polymer. It has a polymer lower, has a polymer upper. There's no dust cover. It does have a shell deflector that is literally just an extra piece that's screwed on, and these are kind of notorious for making themselves unscrewed. The charging handle is polymer, and it feels it when you manipulate it. It's not very inspiring It doesn't inspire a ton of confidence. Taking it apart shows, I can get that guy all the way out. It's a little bit, you can't pivot it forward like you normally can, and you'll see why. Inside the upper, you have a non-standard bolt carrier. Bolt carrier is a fair bit shorter than a normal AR bolt carrier. It's also lighter, but the bolt itself, I believe, is a standard bolt. This is a direct gas impingement version or model. There's no like fancy, piston system or anything like that. This is just a short, normal gas system. So the upper, you can see it's fully polymer, and that is kind of the undoing. I mean, even the takedown lugs on this are polymer. They're not really reinforced at all. The lower is where things get a little bit weirder. First off, you'll notice your buffer and your recoil spring assembly, or buffer spring assembly. Not exactly standard parts, and they're designed to fit like that. And that's what keeps you from being able to pivot the front forward and disassemble this, is because of this very strange setup that was required in order to work with the receiver extension that they elected to use. That buffer tube is plastic. It is attached to this, both threaded and like kind of locked in place. These are notorious for breaking. If you look inside, there's a little guide rod for that spring, little spring guide, which is very, very weird. None of these are normal parts. That makes aftermarket compatibility with changing some of this stuff out a little bit tricky. Now, my understanding, I may or may not do this because this isn't exactly going to be like a major shooter for me, is that you can actually swap in a normal AR buffer tube, but then you have to swap in a normal AR buffer, and then you have to swap in, I believe, a normal AR bolt carrier group. You kind of have to switch the whole operating system out in order to use stuff like a standard buffer tube on here. However, I'm going to be playing around with this and trying to come up with some 3D printable cool options to add a brace, because this little guy with the brace would be very cool. You have a standard-ish mil-spec trigger group. There's nothing too crazy in there. But the lower you see, it's not really beefed up in any way like you would see some polymer lowers now. It's really just kind of a standard polymer lower. And that is largely what caused these, not necessarily what caused them to fail. What caused them to fail is that AR pistols weren't good. They weren't really something, I mean, even now they're still kind of a novelty, but back then they were really, really a novelty just because you didn't have things like pistol braces like we have today, which are, I mean, let's not fool ourselves here. That's really the only thing that makes an AR pistol worth having, is that you can actually have somewhat stable firing from your AR pistol. You don't really have that luxury with this type of setup. So these didn't do particularly well with any real shooters. Nobody was running these in competitions. Nobody was running tactical versions of these. The rifle versions of these, and Bushmaster did make rifle versions of these that were also incredibly lightweight. And those also kind of failed mainly based on reliability issues, just because you are using some proprietary parts. You're using polymer uppers and lowers, which is just not a great idea in the 1990s and early 2000s, and still really isn't a good idea today, unless you're doing some really cool stuff like 3D printing a Biden's Bane. That's a really cool polymer upper. That's not the case here. So they weren't necessarily commercial successes. For some reason, Bushmaster still continues the Carbon 15 line today. Very different. They're more kind of standard ARs now, and I think they use aluminum uppers now. They might even use aluminum lowers now. I have no idea. I don't follow Bushmaster. I haven't followed them for years and years, but theoretically, there is still technically a carbon 15 series out here. But yeah, they just weren't particularly good guns for real motivated shooters, for professional shooters. Criminals don't care. Criminals want something small and lightweight, and these kind of became known as little drive-by machines. You know, at the time, and even today, this is a very small package to give you 5.56 performance with a detachable magazine and just, you know, standard capacity magazines. Okay, like, if your goal is to hang this out the side of a car and shoot at people who are wearing different colored clothes than you, a carbon 15 is a pretty good option there. And unfortunately, these had that reputation, which was earned as being kind of drive-by machines. In fact, you can find several rap songs that are referencing people with their carbon 15. And that kind of brings about why I have this carbon 15. I first kind of came across the carbon 15, this particular version, with the integrated top rail, which is almost like a swan sleeve. This is actually like a really nice bit of kit up here on top. It slides onto the upper. It gives you adjustable front and rear sights. It's nice, and it serves as a mounting point for this handguard. And normally it has a rail on the bottom as well, but I took the rail off the bottom because I don't like the rail on the bottom. But I still obviously have the rail on the bottom in case I decide to add it later. But I first discovered this iteration of the carbon 15 when the rapper T.I. was arrested. He was a felon at the time, is still a felon today, but he was arrested by having one of his bodyguards try to buy some machine guns. And unfortunately, his bodyguard tried to buy some machine guns from a federal agent, and that didn't go well for him, obviously. And when he was arrested, he was found with a lot of guns that he could not legally possess because he was, as I said, a felon. And one of the guns that he had was Bushmaster Carbon 15. This kind of exact version. This had the bottom rail and it had a little light on it. And I saw that thing and I thought, man, that is a cool looking gun. And I replicated it in airsoft. So years and years and years ago, I did an airsoft carbon 15 build, and it is actually one of my favorite airsoft builds that I've ever done. I ended up selling it to someone who ended up selling it to someone else, and who knows, one of you guys watching today may actually have my old carbon 15 airsoft build. It's one of a kind for sure. But I always wanted one of these, but I was never really in a position to just throw dumb money at one. So now in order to add it to the collection and to talk to you guys about it and to give information about the history of it, I was able to purchase one, and here we are today. These are extremely cheap if you find them. I got this guy for like $400, and frankly, that's too much money. You can build a way better AR pistol for $400 and not rely on polymer receivers that crack. That's the big thing. These receivers have a short lifespan, so this guy probably won't get shot that much. But they crack really, really bad. Having that weird kind of funky gas system, that intermediate length is shorter than a carbine gas system, but that intermediate length gas system, I think it's a little longer than a pistol, but shorter than a carbine. But these recoil aggressively, and you're recoiling into plastic everything, which flexes, and then unfortunately with time, these are all 20-plus-year-old, polymers, they break. And this one is remarkably not broken, and I'm hoping to keep it that way. I don't want to shoot it a ton, but we do want to get it out to the range. Because really, there's only one way to run this. I've had a PMAG in here, but really, when you're running a carbon 15 or any short Patriot-style AR, you really need to be running it with the double titty, because it's appropriate. The funny part is, so this, like I said, these were built to be extremely lightweight. This is the heavyweight version of the pistol because it has I think it's an aluminum handguard, an aluminum top rail, but it adds a little bit of weight to it. But this guy still weighs like 3 pounds and change, like 3.5 pounds. This loaded magazine weighs more than this entire pistol. It's hard to stress how small and lightweight this is. It is actually pretty ergonomic with this thin, this oval shape on this handguard. I actually love this handguard. It's very comfortable. There were two versions. There's this guy, which had the bottom rail, and then there was another one that looked like an M203, had ribs in it, and that one, that one's a pretty cool one too. But I really like the textured oval handguard. And some of these parts are parts that I want to replicate for normal AR builds. I want to replicate some of this stuff to be 3D printable. Handguards, I'm always super iffy about making those 3D printable, just because there's a lot of heat happening in there, and that's why this is made out of aluminum. Even Bushmaster knew, like, yeah, maybe let's not make this whole handguard out of polymer. So yeah, the end goal of this is to, first off, design some parts specifically for this one to make it a little bit more functional and, you know, a little bit more useful. And two, to replicate some of the things that I like about this platform so that anybody can do it. So yeah, that is the Bushmaster Carbon 15. A kind of terrible relic of a kind of terrible time in firearm law history. And now I have one. And now I can, you know, make like TI and hopefully not have this end up on an evidence table anytime soon. But I think we might need to do a range day with some more interesting shooting drills and shooting positions. Not exactly going to be doing some tactical run and gun with this. Might be doing some hood run and gun with this one. As always, of course, thank you for watching.